This is KMJ's special 2020 campaign coverage, Ballot Boxing with Aaron Abadia.
We're talking with legal analyst James Bell about the impeachment process and the political fight that has ensued. James, President Trump and a lot of his allies have said, the attention really should be placed on Joe Biden. There's the infamous tape of Joe Biden talking about the withholding of U.S. aid to Ukraine if the prosecutor that was doing some investigations that he apparently did not approve of wasn't fired, and ultimately he was heard on tape saying that within a matter of hours after the threat that the prosecutor was fired. Is there any chance from a legal standpoint that Republicans will have a way, whether it's a public relations stunt or a legal challenge, that presidential candidate and former Vice President Joe Biden would face any sort of criticism and be placed under the microscope for that?
Absolutely. Of course, that's where the Republicans are going to go, because when you're defending a position as a litigator, or in this position, most folks in the Senate are lawyers, and a lot of them are trial lawyers. It's to delay, defend, deflect, and more importantly, to obfuscate. And the more obfuscation there is, the better it is for your client or the position that you're trying to put forward. And the more time and effort that's spent on issues involving Vice President Biden, the more time you're not focused in on President Trump and whatever acts, if any, he engaged in. So of course, I see that is going to be in the playbook, absolutely, in my opinion. If
President Trump is reelected next year in 2020, what would you think the Democrats might try to do in terms of impeachment and in continuing the process? I
think there has to be. The answer is I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did. But I think there's a point at which there's a point of diminishing returns. And there's a point at which the Democrats are going to be hurting themselves. There's something to be said for let's get back to business. And business is healthcare, education, the border, trade policy, foreign policy, things along these natures. What Americans really need, tax issues, helping the middle class, helping folks buy homes, things of that sort, as opposed to focusing in on these events. I hate to say making mountains out of molehills, but we're talking about the president who sits in the position of having being the exclusive province of foreign policy, and we're questioning the president in doing that. I think at some point we got to get back to let's do what's best for the country, making sure the economy is well. Interest rates are at an all-time low. It's great for house buying, so on and so. Unemployment's at one of the lowest rates, et cetera. So, for the Democrats to continue to attack, I think, not to be long-winded about it, but there's if President Trump gets into a second term, it's a fait accompli. He's already in the second term. What can the Democrats do?
I want to move from impeachment and talk about the congressional subpoenas. Prior to the impeachment hearings getting underway, we heard a lot about how it was un-American that members of the Trump team, both from his campaign and those from his cabinet, ignored congressional subpoenas. And there was talk about, there needs to be legal action taken against them to indicate that it is unacceptable for anybody to ignore a congressional subpoena. What exactly, in a nutshell, is the legal requirement for somebody who receives a congressional subpoena? What are they required to do by law?
A couple of things. One, a subpoena is the equivalent of a court order, and obviously Congress isn't court, but they sit in the position of a court as it relates to issuing their subpoenas. So there are only a couple of things that can be done. One, object, move to file a motion to quash the subpoena and for a protective order. and object to the request if there's a document request that goes along with a subpoena. So let me back up. A subpoena that has either two or three functions. Two or three functions. One, compel somebody to testify. Two, compel somebody to bring documents. Or three, compel somebody to testify and bring documents. And so, in a nutshell, what you're supposed to do is either you comply, you testify, and or bring the documents, whatever is required of you as it relates to the subpoena, or you file a motion to quash and a motion for protective order and object to the document requests. And then you have a fight about, is the request too vague, too broad? If it's for testimony, is executive privilege, attorney-client privilege? Are there some things that would basically immunize the witness from having to respond to the subpoena? Hopefully that was an answer in a nutshell for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. One last question as we're up against the clock here. We've seen one of the other kind of big causes that the president's base rallies around is the authority that he has to appoint judges. If President Trump wins another term, what do you see the judicial landscape looking like over the next several years? Do you think that the court, if there's another vacancy, will take an even more conservative turn?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If there's another vacancy and President Trump is reelected, of course he's going to put somebody on the bench with the same or similar views as President Trump, that is in favor of big business and a judicial appointee that is in harmony and in line with President Trump's base, election base. So you can count on, if there's another vacancy, that there will be another conservative on the panel. More importantly is the amount of federal judges that may be retiring or leaving office or leaving the bench. Those positions, most people don't talk about it, but those positions for U.S. District Court judges, if they're leaving, he's going to appoint more Republican judges to the U.S. district benches throughout the country. And let's not forget, as a general proposition, a United States district judge is more powerful in some instances than the president. The president can issue an executive order. That president can sign a law into legislation. And you know what? A judge in the western part of Colorado, where there's only one U.S. federal district judge, can render that law unconstitutional and stop it from being in effect. Just look at the U.S. district judge in Hawaii who held President Trump's position as it relates to different categories of coming into the United States, that there would be a ban. That was rendered unconstitutional. Once it got through to the Supreme Court, of course, the U.S. district judge out of Hawaii got overturned. But let's not forget, there was a year or two that had passed where President Trump's policy was stayed in its place. It had no force and effect. So these U.S. district judges are the front line and the most powerful folks, some of the most powerful folks in the country, and more powerful than the president to a certain extent, because this legislation has to go through them. So if you don't have the Democrats on the U.S. district benches and you've got a lot of Republicans on the U.S. district benches, then at least as it relates to the first shot at trying to render a law unconstitutional, if the Republicans are sitting in those seats, you're not going to have as many challenges to conservative-based laws.
James Bell, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure to get your insight. We'll have to have you back on Ballot Boxing sometime soon.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
This is KMJ's special 2020 campaign coverage, Ballot Boxing with Aaron Abadia.